Hi, everybody. When a person murders another person, how do we categorize the person who has been murdered? How do we label the victim? Do we stick with one single label to make a simpler narrative, or do we use several categorizations, perhaps to paint a more nuanced picture, or for some other reason? Well, let's take the murder of Eva-Marree, a case that I've already talked about here on YouTube once today. Eva-Marree, she was a woman, she was a parent, she was an activist, and she was also the thing that she would call a sex worker. And that is what I call it as well. Other persons have other names for this. There are a lot of people who would prefer to call her a prostitute, or a whore, or a hooker, or why not simply a dirty tramp, or something like that. There are a lot of negative words that one can use. And there are a lot of people who are not comfortable with the word sex worker. They prefer those negative words because they feel that this is what sex workers deserve. Eva-Marree strongly disagreed. She felt that those words were unfair and insulting, that she and her colleagues deserves to be treated with respect just like everybody else. This murder has been up in the mass media a lot, and the mass media has not called her any of those bad names, and they have not called her a sex worker either. They have kept themselves to the narrative where a woman is murdered by a man, where a mother is murdered by a man. In a way, this is a matter of so-called respect. You see, there is a lot of bigotry in our society, a lot of hatred against women and against sex workers. But the bigotry and prejudice against sex workers is socially accepted. After I made my first video today, James came with a very good response, and I'm linking this video as a response to that one. In this video, he showed the photographs of several sex workers who have been murdered and slandered by the mass media, victim blamed for their own murders on the basis of them being insert derogatory slur here. Well, the Swedish mass media wouldn't do that. We have the Swedish model, which is so much superior. In Sweden, we don't view adult human women as some kind of inhuman filth. Oh no, we view them as real human wayward children. We, as a culture, accept that they are human, but we don't accept that they are adult. We consider them to be poor little victims of themselves instead of being filthy. And of course, that is a very small step upwards. It is an improvement, but it's not good enough. The mass media goes the pity the poor little victim route. And of course, that's much preferable to blaming her for the murder, but this is very double-edged, because people will find out eventually, one way or another. What might be happening here is that while people have sympathy for her, she's not a sex worker officially. But then people can just dismiss the murder with, oh, by the way, never mind, it turns out that she was, insert derogatory word for sex workers here. Just on time, once the sympathy is gone. No, we need to acknowledge two things: that she was a sex worker, and that this doesn't matter. She was fully adult, a responsible human being who should not be blamed and should not be looked down upon, should not be stigmatized or belittled. There are two ways in which one can make sex work relevant for a murder. Like I said, there's a lot of bigotry in society, and these are the two things I'm talking about, the two sides of that coin. On the one hand, we can go with the bigotry, just like those mass media that James referred to. We can blame the victim. But there's another path too. We can acknowledge the basic concept that when there is a lot of bigotry against a category of people, crimes against this category can be hate crimes. We must take into account to what extent the bigotry was a part of the crime, and if it turns out that it was a part of the crime, then the judgment should be harsher. Society needs to protect sex workers because they deserve the exact same protection as everybody else, no more, no less. And they are also a group that is being targeted disproportionately and therefore need and deserve extra protection, not because they are more or less worthy, but because they are more targeted. Same thing as with gay people or immigrants or whatever group is being systematically targeted by bigots. And this is the approach that I'm advocating here. I'm talking about society on a whole, not the individual case. I will never know for sure to what extent this murder was guided by bigotry. I mean, of course, he won't tell anyone that he was guided by bigotry. Come on. Not even the Ku Klux Klan talks that way. And like I said in my previous video, it might be that the whole thing is just a strategy. As one of my friends pointed out, if he had told social services that, hey, I'm a man and she's a woman, therefore I must have sole custody and I must decide everything about the children, social services would not have listened. And that's not what he told them. He told them that she's a sex worker and I'm not, therefore I should have sole custody and decide everything about the children. And social services did listen to him for many years. Once they started listening to the mother as well, once they started to get the idea that maybe she's not that little child they have been imposing on her all these years, well, then he murdered not only her but also tried to murder one of the social workers. And I don't know if this is true or not, might be a rumor, but I heard that he also started stalking and harassing social workers quite recently. I don't know, I don't care. There are many different versions going around here. And this thing about bigotry as hate crimes, it won't affect him in either case. Because technically, hate crimes can't be done against sex workers according to Swedish law because they are not one of those minorities that the government happens to like at the moment. Of course, having the system built on whether or not society likes a certain group at the moment is ridiculous. We need to change the system at the core to include anyone being targeted by bigotry, not only specific groups, but that's another issue. So that's all I have to say about. No, it's not all I have to say about categorization for now. I really need to bring up this thing about being an activist as well. To me personally, on an emotional level, it's very important that it was an activist who was killed in the struggle that she was fighting for. And I'm not the only one that feels this way. Of course, this is not relevant to the actual case. I'm pretty sure the murderer didn't intend the murder to be a political statement against her political struggle, but nevertheless, these last number of years, she has been fighting for the idea that sex workers can be good parents, and he have been fighting for the idea that they cannot. And when he didn't get his way, he murdered her. Sure, he did that for the individual case, not for the big picture, in all likelihood, but nevertheless, I'm more than pissed off here. And like I said, I'm not the only one. Tomorrow we're going to have a silent minute. I mean, the big memorial is in Västerås, but the rest of us around the country in RFSU and other organizations, not only Rose Alliance, will have a silent minute at 4:30 p.m. And yeah, this is all I have to say for this time. I'm going to talk a bit more about the destructiveness of the Swedish model and how even more destructive those other patriarchal versions are in another video. Good night and live long and prosper.